All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today for this interview on the topic of empowering language learners. My name is Ryan Wertz, and I represent the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages. You may know us as NACESFL. Joining me today is Giovanni Moretta, an 18-year-old college student at Kent State University's Stark campus in Canton, Ohio. As you're going to quickly find out, Giovanni is and has been for some time now, a highly empowered and self-motivated language learner. Giovanni, it's great that you could join me today for this conversation.
No, I'm definitely really thrilled to be here. This is an awesome opportunity, and the entire concept of biliteracy and just language learning in general is something that I'm very passionate about. So any opportunity I get to talk to anybody about it is definitely a really big deal for me, let alone an entire interview for a conference about the topic. So I'm definitely thrilled.
Yeah, when I met you, the passion for learning languages came through loud and clear. So, Giovanni, I'm wondering if you could begin by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself as a world language learner. You know, what language you're learning now, when you got started learning languages, how much of your learning has been school-based versus self-taught, and things like that.
Yeah, so currently I'm in my first year of college, but I actually started learning languages roughly around my freshman year of high school when I started Spanish 1. I had taken a few courses in middle school and had a bit of a knack for it, but I had never thought really much of it until I got into that class. And I was really good in Spanish 1, and I ended up just helping a lot of my friends out with the class. And then once I progressed to Spanish 2, I began to realize that I could actually achieve fluency in the language, that I could use it practically. And so I started doing a lot of research on my own. If I ever had a question or if I wanted to know how to say something, how I would say it in English, I would just do my own research. And so by that point, class became more of an outlet to practice the things that I would teach myself. So I would go along with what we were doing in class. Most of the time, I was probably months ahead in content. And so then I progressed in high school. And I ended up skipping a year of Spanish and moving on to International Baccalaureate Spanish, which that class was largely guided by just practicing in class. And so I did even more research, and I would start grouping different tenses together and teach them to myself the way that I saw them and the way that they made sense to me. And so from there, I just began progressing even further, and I ended up starting to make videos last December on TikTok in Spanish, and I ended up getting a following because of it. And so that's when my Spanish really took off, and I gained fluency, cultural fluency, and I started to really feel comfortable in the language. So currently, as I said, I'm in my first year of college, and I'm taking French because I've already, as I said, I'm comfortable with Spanish, and eventually I'll move on to Portuguese and perhaps some other language categories. But that's what I'm working on currently, and that's kind of how I've learned these languages and how I prefer to learn language.
Well, I love the passion. I love the fact that you're working on becoming a trilingual person at this point. I've heard you. I've seen some of your TikTok videos that you've posted on Instagram, and your Spanish is really good. It's pretty
Mhm.
amazing. Not what you typically expect from someone who just graduated from high school and is a first-year university
Uh-huh.
student.
No,
So
thank
you're to be commended, and I wish you the best of luck with the French as and with the hope that you do as well as you did with the Spanish.
you.
So, Giovanni, my next question, you know, upon graduation, you earned an Ohio Seal of Biliteracy.
Mhm.
And our audience today includes a lot of people who are very interested in this topic of a Seal of Biliteracy. Could you tell us just a little bit about earning that recognition and how it made you feel?
I was absolutely ecstatic to finally get that. When I initially found out about the program, which was relatively new to Ohio, I thought it was really awesome that they were offering something like that. And being that, at least where I went to high school, there were very few people who were interested in foreign language to the extent that I was. And so when I found out that I was already taking advanced Spanish classes that were going to prepare me for something like that, so I was so excited to finally receive that. And I would like to say that now that I have it, it's not that the seal actually improves my language skills by any means, but having that makes me feel more official in a way. And so when I'm going to maybe apply for a new job or talk with people, I feel more comfortable in stating that, you know, I consider myself to be fluent in Spanish. I'm comfortable and more confident in my own skills. And so I think not only assuring other people of that and getting more opportunities, but also assuring yourself of that is really important as a language learner, and helping you use it practically.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Um, when you hear me use the term empowered learner, what comes to mind? What kind of things can empower a language learner, in your opinion?
I really think the number one thing is having passion and like an absolute fascination for it. And if you're lacking that kind of passion, you need to find a way to gain that. And there's so much local color and culture and the things that we do and the way we conduct ourselves in everyday life, that there are so many outlets for you to find that passion. And so I just think really caring about it and making it a priority in your own life um, is really what being an empowered learner is. And I would say that separating education from the classroom is really important because you can learn outside the classroom, and the classroom oftentimes, especially with language, isn't always the most practical or best way to acquire language and really gain fluency. So I just think that separating those two is really important. But that's what I think of when I think of an empowered learner.
Okay, I want to dig into this idea a little bit more. So obviously, I think you can agree with me that you are indeed an empowered language learner. And I want to know why. I want to know what you do to empower yourself.
Um, to empower myself, I sort of, with anything, regardless of language, I really enjoy education. I see the value in acquiring knowledge and passing it on to others. That's something that I firmly believe in. But then when it comes to language, I make the languages that I'm learning a part of my life. I try to immerse myself and find any way to practice, whether it be music, or if I'm trying to talk with my friends, or really just have conversations about those kinds of things. That's where making it something that is part of your everyday life becomes very important. And that's when you really become empowered, because you're now learning practically every moment of the day and seeking opportunities to learn more. And that's really important. And I think that's where a lot of people sort of fail to become an empowered learner.
Okay, I wanna just spend a second. You said something that struck a chord with me, about, kind of reaching out to people and having conversations. For a lot of learners, that's really hard, because, there's that fear that you're gonna say something wrong, you're gonna embarrass yourself, you're gonna make a mistake. But we know that practice makes perfect, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about these practice opportunities that you made for yourself.
So like I said, I would speak with my friends, and in my international baccalaureate Spanish class, it was a really small, like close knit group of kids, many of whom were in other IB classes, and essentially, I would try to just push using Spanish, whatever class we're in, wherever we're at, if we're not even in school. I was always trying to open the door for us to practice bringing things up. If I have a question, or if they have a question, like I'm going to talk about it. And also just finding external opportunities, like the internet is a beautiful thing. That's how I progressed a lot. You can find so many opportunities online, because if you think about it, regardless of what the language, unless the language you're trying to learn is dead, like it's Latin or Greek, there are people who conduct their lives with this language. So there's always a plethora of resources available, and people with whom you can interact with and essentially better yourself.
Excellent. Hearing all those thoughts, I would say that you're not only a highly empowered learner, you're a fearless learner. And I think it's that quality of fearlessness that really serves you well.
Mhm.
Could you tell us more about what your motivation has been? And specifically, I'd love for you to talk about what learning strategies you've used personally to move yourself forward in your learning.
So, I would like to say that towards the beginning of the learning process, I would really focus on drilling myself on things like grammar and verbs, to the point that I was just always constantly practicing, be it like with a whiteboard or on paper or just in my head. It's constantly drilling, drilling, drilling. But after you solidify those things, really, like I said, immersing yourself in the language, finding a way to make it a part of your life is the most important thing. One way that I would do that is you don't learn language by not speaking it. So constantly just like narrating your life in that language, or where you would typically have a conversation in your head in English, perhaps just do it in a different language. Those were probably the two things that helped me um, rapidly acquire the language. Like I honestly would say that those two things are what have made me the language learner that I am today. And just making those things a part of your life, or I'll talk to my pets in Spanish and stuff like that. Just finding a way to make your daily life an opportunity for learning is probably the best thing that you can do. And then additionally, just like another thing, putting your phone in a different language. We use our phones all the time. Nowadays, we're all pretty much addicted to our phones, even though we would like to say that we're not. So if you're constantly on that and that's in a different language, you're not only opening up your phone to see that language, but then a lot of times your social media will be in that language. And when you search things on social media, they'll come up in that language, meaning you're seeing people who use that language and they're interacting in their normal lives and you're just observing it. So sort of like a portal into a different world in that manner. Yeah, so immersion is definitely the key with that.
I was just going to say, you are totally describing immersion, and I know we've got some immersion educators on here. So hearing you say that, the way to go about this is to literally immerse yourself in the language, you probably made a lot of our listeners or viewers really happy with that comment. Giovanni, recently you had the opportunity to preview two tools that NACESFL, the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages, developed in partnership with the Center for Advanced Second Language Studies at the University of Oregon. They were the Linguagrow Reflective Learning Process Framework and tools, and also Linguafolio Online. Let's talk about Linguagrow, all right, that reflective learning process framework first of all. And if you could share some of your initial impressions, about these resources and how they might help to empower language learners to kind of take the reins and start self-directing their own learning.
Yeah. My initial impression was just that everything was very realistic and it was very different from traditional materials that I come across that really focus on repetition that isn't really based on learning, but more so based on learning different associations with things that'll get you the right answer. There was a strong focus on setting goals, and there was a really strong focus on finding your own motivation and also being culturally aware of the language and the people that use that language. I think all of the materials really promoted, like I said, a sense of motivation, but just allowing people to sort of separate the negative connotation that language classes sort of have nowadays, where you're doing this worksheet and you have to fill out this, and this, and that's how you learn. It was really focusing on, like I said, things like emerging yourself in that language, totally being submersed within the language. And I guess the best way to put it would be to say that it really created a space for autonomy and allowing people to take control of the language. And like I said, like separating the classroom from education, those were the main ideals that I saw within the materials. And I really did agree with them. And I could tell that people who were passionate about languages and have focused on this topic for a long time came up with these resources.
Yeah. One of those resources in the Linguagrow framework was a pretty extensive list of learner strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Strategies for improving your interpersonal skills, strategies for improving your presentational skills, your interpretive skills. Could you talk just a little bit about that particular resource? I remember when you were previewing all of these materials, you spent quite a bit of time on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be curious to hear what you might have to tell our audience today about that tool.
Yeah. I think that those particular things really interested me because it's not something that you focus on, not something that's very focused on within the traditional classroom setting, because like interpersonal skills, presentational skills, it opted for things that are typically, I guess, skills that you have to acquire on your own that aren't typically taught to you or even really given as food for thought. Like nobody really focuses on what kind of skills to do when you're giving a presentation or when you're having a one-on-one conversation or considering the context of the language that you're using and how that's going to affect the other person directly, and just like different cues, different things to keep in mind while you're speaking, and not even having to harp on them necessarily, but really just actually identifying those small things that most people have to learn the hard way was really, really influential. And I think that was definitely positive for language learning.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. And just for the benefit of our audience, I should explain that Linguagrow, which is probably a new term to most people, something they're not familiar with, is actually representative of the rebirth of a tool that many of us know and have used for many years, which was Necessful's Linguafolio, which was a student self-assessment portfolio. We had gotten a lot of feedback over the years that the Linguafolio tool was a bit cumbersome and maybe a little too comprehensive. And so based on feedback, we have completely retooled Linguafolio into this new tool, this new framework called Linguagrow. So I guess we should make that clear to our audience. The other tool that you previewed for us and gave us some feedback on was Linguafolio Online. And this is a tool, it's a version, an online version of the old Linguafolio tool that's produced by Castles at the University of Oregon. Many people using Linguafolio around the country, but not nearly as many people as we'd love to see using it. Tell us a little bit about your impressions of Linguafolio Online and how that could help learners kind of take up the reins and start self-directing their own learning.
I think that with the Linguafolio Online, first of all, just having it online makes it more accessible in general. But there was also this sort of push towards creating a space for you to have all of your language stuff, a space for you to record your progress, to say what you need to say, just a space for you to practice and put it all in one, as opposed to like other apps where I've seen where like Duolingo, for example, is a very good beginner app, but it's sort of just laid out things for you to do. Whereas I feel like Linguafolio allows you to have more control, give yourself room to talk about the things that you want to talk about, to focus on the goals that you have rather than just focusing on what this software has set up for you that everybody goes through. And I think, like providing a space to maybe journal or write things down and keep all of it in one area is really beneficial, especially because language is everywhere. And so trying to concentrate it into one place can be difficult sometimes. And I think that's a large issue for a lot of language learners.
Yep, I would agree with you. One of the aspects of Linguafolio Online is the ability for Linguafolio Online users to upload evidence of what they know and can do with the language. So, if you've been working on developing your interpersonal speaking skills, or maybe you've been working on your interpersonal writing skills, texting in your target language, you can actually upload evidence to support the level of proficiency that you're working towards. What do you think of that particular feature?
I absolutely love that feature. As I think I said when I was originally previewing the materials, I do similar things on my own, but like I said, having it all concentrated in one area is nice because I think that having that progress, just with everything, if you're trying to make progress in anything in general, it's really good to document it. And so maybe previously I would take videos on my Snapchat and save them to my memories, or have some in my camera roll and there would be a voice memo here and a picture of this thing that I wrote down here. Those are all really fantastic ways to track yourself. And that's how you can, one, keep track of your goals, but two, also serve as motivation, because a lot of times we do lack motivation and language learning is hard. It's going to be really frustrating. So I think that having all those features built into one is absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it keeps things centralized, and it allows you to push your goals even further and hold yourself accountable, but also keep yourself motivated to do more in the future.
Yeah, I think the research that's been done on Linguafolio over the last several years has really kind of driven home the point that, giving learners some autonomy over their learning, what topics they're choosing or what strategies they're using to improve their abilities. All of this is showing us that the use of these kind of tools is really highly motivational. So figure that, give kids more control or learners more control, and they run with that. So you've made a really good point for us here, and the research supports exactly what you're saying, Giovanni. Giovanni, a lot of language teachers become really nervous and start to freak out a bit when you ask them to make the learning process more autonomous for their students. Teachers don't necessarily feel comfortable giving up their control.
Mhm.
Um, what advice do you have for teachers about loosening up on the reins a bit and letting their students set some of their own learning goals and select topics that interest them and learning strategies that they know work best for them?
I have a plethora of thoughts on this topic. Firstly, I would just like to start off by saying that there are already so many hindrances in the United States to language learning, with the surge of nationalism in probably the past decade, um, with geographical issues being that the United States is a vast piece of land and the language that's majority spoken is already English, as well as U.S. relations and things like that. We're very closed off in regards to international politics and things like that. So there's already a sort of stigma to language learning. A lot of people feel that they don't need to do it. So having that closed off attitude right off the bat is already not going to be helping your students. It's going to hinder them from learning, and it's actually going to not motivate them at all. It's going to do the exact opposite. I have so many friends and people that I've known who have this negative association with language classes, and so they don't even have any interest in doing anything with it in the future. So I think right off the bat, just recognizing that there's already hindrances and that you do not need to be one of them, is important. But also just thinking about language acquisition in general. We all did not learn English the same way. Yes, it was our native tongue, if it was your native language, but we didn't learn it at the same time. There was no one way to do it, and we all went at different paces. There's no like set way for you to learn a language, and so recognizing that is also very important. But I think um, straying away from very technical exercises after certain points, or worksheets, like I've said, and things that are very boring and tedious, they're important at first because you have to get the foundation down. But if you can't apply those things in real life, then one, what they've learned is useless, and two, they're probably not having fun doing it. I myself personally said, like, I'm passionate about language learning, but once I got into like my junior and senior year and a topic would come around that maybe I was already familiar with and we had to do worksheets for it, that was the last thing I was going to do. And I was probably nodding off in class because at that point it wasn't enjoyable for me. But that's not to say that I'm not learning a language, because I obviously have taken it into my own hands. And I really think that recognizing that students are only going to learn as much as they want to, and they have to want to learn. And so making that environment enjoyable and understanding that there's so many ways to learn language, be it through music or TVs, or like I said, your phone. There's so many cultural aspects, so many things that we already do in our native language that can be achieved. And a lot of them you can do passively, and you actually make a lot of gains with that. So just letting go and realizing that it's better off, somebody is better off learning a little bit but having enjoyed it than they are learning a ton of material and hating it the entire time, because then they just have a negative association.
I heard that from my students over and over again when I was in the classroom. They always appreciated when I brought the language alive and we were actually using the language in real life or very lifelike situations, and especially when we were focusing on topics that they were interested in, which may or may not have been topics that I was interested in as their teacher. But I realized that in order to hook them, I had to um, give them some freedom often to select the topics that they were studying. Maybe we were going to study a certain grammar structure or a certain cultural aspect, but then trying to build in that freedom for them to, have some choice and to be able to select strategies or the topics or to set their own goals. That was always the challenge for me, but it usually played to my favor because usually my kids were really motivated for me. So talking about learners, conversely, what advice would you give other students who are really interested in learning another language, but who just aren't engaged or inspired by a traditional classroom learning environment? What can
Um,
they do?
I would say take the steps that I have, because, like I said, I've gone through a similar phase. You have to find areas that fascinate you, or maybe if you'd like to learn a language and you don't have one in mind, analyze the things around you and things that you're already interested in. Like I said, there's already so much culture and local color in many of the things that we do. For example, one of my best friends has been obsessed with anime since we were in like middle school. He's now trying to learn Japanese because through the love of the shows, you watch it in Japanese, and that suddenly piques his interest. So find things that you are naturally interested in. And obviously, be it if you have a choice, find a language that suits you. Don't just take the one or focus on one that is displayed in front of you if you have absolutely no interest or practical use for it. And also just realizing that it really is a tough process, and it's only as good as you're going to make it, and that it's actually plausible too. A lot of people think when they hear that I speak one and now I'm working on another language, like, it's like, how do you do that? It's very plausible. You learned English, you can do it with another one, and it's not an impossible feat. It's something that's very doable. And so just analyzing what you have around you and really focusing on yourself and realizing that I have these interests and I don't like this, and finding what you like and don't like is very important as far as that is concerned.
Thank you for that advice. I think it's really sage advice that you've given. Um, and speaking of advice, I want to go back to this notion of putting yourself out there. To, if you're going to become a language learner, you've got to gain confidence. So what advice could you give your peers who are just really fearful about putting themselves out there and making mistakes in front of others?
Generally speaking, you are smarter with the mistakes that you have made in front of others than the people who don't even venture to make those mistakes. Um, it is a really embarrassing thing, and I feel like a lot of times, especially in a school environment, we're always supposed to do good, and in every other subject you're doing, you're supposed to be learning the content and applying it very well so that you do well in the class. But language learning is not set up in that manner. You are going to make mistakes, and that's what's important. But I would also like to stress that those embarrassing mistakes that you make are going to help you. They're going to help you the most out of everything. Um, because all the times that you got this, and that right probably aren't going to stick out in your mind. But that one time that you said something really, really bizarre or completely incorrectly in class is going to stick in your mind, especially if those are with native speakers. I have so many instances where I've been talking to people like native Spanish speakers, and I totally goofed up, and I remember that, and I'm never going to make those mistakes again because they stick out in your mind. So just sort of taking advantage of the natural human experience and then applying that to language can really run to your benefit. And overall, it's only going to help you. And after a while, it becomes comical. I put myself in front of thousands of people online speaking like what I thought was good Spanish, only to find out there were so many things wrong with it. And at first, I really, really took it to heart. I would get very upset at myself until I realized that almost a year later, I have bettered myself beyond belief, and I'm better now for it.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you have that confidence now that we all have made those blunders, those bloopers in the past. I can think back on some really doozies that I let fly, and like you said, won't ever make those mistakes again. And thankfully, I'm at a point in my life where I can just kind of laugh at those kind of things, and I think that's part of the key, right? Keeping your sense of humor in the midst of all of the intensity of learning, and remembering that, this is supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to communicate with others, and understanding their cultures, that's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And talking about cultures, our time is almost up, but before we sign off, I have one more very, very critical question. You and I have talked before about the importance of developing intercultural competence, and how language and culture are completely tied to one another. I'm just wondering if you could share your thoughts with our audience on the best ways that you've encountered to really bolster your intercultural skills, and help you relate to and communicate better with people from different cultures.
Yes, that is one of the most important things when you're learning language, because once you actually go to apply that language, there's going to be a lot of roadblocks that you run into that may cause you issues, and you could be looked at as insensitive. So it's always just important to keep culture in mind and to be able to navigate that culture. But first, I would just say to analyze the context of the language. So if you're studying Spanish, analyze the countries that speak that language. Whatever country it may be, whatever area of the world you're looking at, it's really good to analyze obviously the social aspects, but even looking at things like their political relations, where that country is located in regards to other countries. how people in that country have to act, politically or socially, whatever. That'll give you context about the language. And then additionally, using things like music and social media, which are the two things that I use constantly. First being music, because I absolutely love music, and music, as it is in English, is very culturally intertwined, in that there are a lot of topics that you don't learn about in school that are in this music, because this is how people conduct their lives. So one, you're going to learn more, but you're also going to learn about what's important to the people who are speaking these languages. What do they find fun? What kind of things are they singing about? What kind of things are they rapping about? Like, whatever it might be, you're going to gain insight because of that. And then also social media, as I've already touched on, I've learned so many things about so many different countries from Latin America. For example, I first tried yerba mate when I was in my sophomore year of high school. And I didn't really like it at first, but then once I got on TikTok and I saw that a lot of Argentinians are obsessed with mate, which I already kind of knew, I sort of took it into consideration and realized that this is like a large part of their life. And really just in the Southern Cone in general, that's very prominent. And so I've adapted that and I drink it all the time now. But I understand the meaning that that drink has, and different instances like that, whether it be that tea or this style of cooking or these different um, like modismos and jergas, like slang that people use within the different countries, is very indicative of who they are as people and how they conduct themselves. And that's really important to keep in mind, because you're going to have to apply the language, as I said. And if you don't understand the cultural context, it's essentially useless to you.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really informative and thought-provoking conversation. Giovanni Moretta, thank you for allowing me to pick your brain today, and for your candor. You've given us much to think about, and we sincerely thank you for your time.
No, I really appreciate it. I'm glad I got to do this. And like I said, I'm always willing to have a conversation about this, because these are really magical experiences and really magical phenomena that occur and that we get to talk about.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and we really appreciate that. I hope our audiences enjoyed our time together as much as I have. Thank you so much.